Chapter 1. Skip and I were camping out on a Vegas sidewalk one night when a giant light beamed down and dragged Skip away. 5 hours later, I got up and noticed he was gone. I knew the cops were about to come around and make their sweep, so I had to pack all our stuff and move. Skip rarely slept. He told me that it was because he was a sleepwalker. I thought it was because he'd been beaten and robbed in his sleep so many times. One time, I asked him if he'd ever been kidnapped. He told me that aliens got him when he was at war in the Middle East. I asked him what the aliens looked like. He said they all looked Mexican. We were headed north from Roswell, New Mexico, where we met outside of a bowling alley. We were both homeless, aimless wanderers in the land of entrapment. Skip came up with the idea of moving north for the summer to live in the wilderness. I hadn't been to the American Northwest, so I went along. We stopped in Vegas because Skip knew someone in town that would let us sleep on their couch for the weekend, but we ended up leaving after a day. The rest of the week we spent panhandling. We raised enough cash to buy a couple of bus tickets to Reno. Anyway, I had to find Skip.
Alright.
Cool. So how's that?
Yeah.
We're not gonna fucking gunfight
right now.
It looks like they're gonna give the speech now.
Yeah, for real.
Alright, chapter 2. We kept a stash hidden at a park nearby to avoid getting mugged. There was some cash in it and a pair of bus tickets for 8 p.m. There was a food vendor nearby that we'd been going to all week. I was hungry, and maybe he'd seen Skip. The vendor was at his usual spot. When I asked about Skip, he said he hadn't seen him, but that he'd keep an eye out. I ate my food and I ran off. I checked every spot we panhandled at and every dumpster we dived in. There was one place left I thought to check. On the night we arrived in town, we made our way over to a house that belonged to a drug dealer named Lick. We were let in by a gang of thuggish-looking people. Each one had a gun, and each one concealed their heads with a mask. They mostly got high and played dominoes. I couldn't understand how Skip got involved with these type of guys. Anyway, Lick was out, so we were waiting for him to arrive. Hours later, Lick arrived. Behind him walked a beautiful blonde woman named Deborah. When Lick saw that we were in his house, he asked his men why they let a pair of crackheads in the house. Deborah stepped in and told Lick that we were her cousins. Lick took a really close look at us. He was a foreigner and had a hard time telling Americans apart. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I went outside to smoke a cigarette. I went over to the side of the house to take a pee when I saw Skip and Deborah talking in the backyard. They looked like they were getting into it. Whatever Skip was telling her pissed her off because she shoved him and ran inside the house. I couldn't make out what they were saying, and I didn't want them to hear me taking a long, hard piss. I tried going back inside, but Skip came out the front door and said we had to leave, so we did. Anyway, I had to see if Skip went back to that house or not. Okay. Well, that's actually your job to say cut. Chapter 3. Deborah answered the door when I knocked this time. She told me to come inside. She told me Skip hadn't been around, so I was ready to run off. Deb asked where I was headed, and I let slip that I was headed to the Greyhound bus station. She grabbed my arm and told me to wait for Lick to return so she could drop me off in his car. I refused, but then Lick arrived. Lick was aggravated about a drug deal that just went bad. Everyone was quiet. I just wanted to leave. Deb asked Lick if she could use the car to drop me off at the bus station. He agreed so long as he could use us to deliver drugs for him at a nearby hotel. When I protested, Lick's thugs surrounded me. Lick walked over and whipped me around a bit with his pistol. Then he pointed his gun at my head and said to deliver his drugs or I'd be dead. Deb drove down the back streets to avoid being seen by the cops. She was going on about something, but I had no interest in listening to her. She actually closed her mouth for a second and it was quiet. I started to think about Skip again. He wanders off a lot. I looked over at Deb driving when she said this. Her blonde hair was flowing against a bright blue sky. She hid her eyes behind her sunglasses and wore red lipstick, like something out of the early 60s, before the dream began to fade. She confessed that she wasn't cousins with Skip. They were actually married. They moved here from Colorado. Skip had a nice job, a nice car, and they had a nice house together. Skip spent a lot of his time gambling, though. Over time, they made friends with some of the locals and began to party. Skip even won big a couple of times at the casinos, and things were looking up. That's around the time they met Lick. He was one of their drug dealers. She said that shortly after Skip lost it all, he just got up and left, without a warning. Deb stuck around and eventually ended up with Lick. What a mess.
Cut.
Chapter 4. By the time Deb finished her story, we arrived at the hotel. She parked across the street and handed me the drugs. The place was run down and had no real security. I was able to make it up to the 7th floor without a problem. I found the door I was supposed to deliver to and knocked. Inside were a couple of CIA listening to some jazz vinyls. They kept stalling with the payment and even tried to propagandize me about the environment, but I wasn't hearing it. I just kept asking for the money. They finally paid up and asked if I wanted to get high with them. I would rather be beaten and robbed by a group of urban youths than spend another second with some femi hipsters. Which is exactly what happened to me when I left with the cash. Before reaching the staircase, I was jumped and robbed by a group of urban youths. I got up and went over to the window and saw Deborah waiting for me outside. It was over. I had to run. I ran all the way to the bus stop. When I got there, some of Lick's thugs were waiting for me. So I ran to a Mexican bus stop nearby, but some of Lick's guys were there too. If they found me, I was dead. The only thing I could think to do was run west until my legs got tired. So I ran until my legs got tired. The sun was setting when I came across some Union Pacific train tracks. There were some boxcars around, so I found an open one and climbed in. I laid still and watched as the headlights from the street nearby leaked through the cracks of the cabin door. I couldn't go, I couldn't stay. I kept still in a state of limbo. I remembered something Skip said once when he was going on about 5G towers and UFO shit. Skip wanted to tear all the 5G towers down because they made his head hurt. One time he asked me if I believed in aliens. I told him I didn't know. He told me that if a UFO ever comes around and starts beaming its light down on us to just float, see where the ride takes you. Anyway, my eyes were getting heavy. Chapter 5. Skip was out in the desert, walking towards a glowing light that kept getting brighter. Skip was out in the desert, walking towards a glowing light that kept getting brighter. Skip was out in the desert, walking towards a glowing light that kept getting brighter. Skip was out in the desert, walking towards a glowing light that kept getting brighter. He turned to me and waved. The light filled the air and consumed Skip like an atomic bomb.
doing? Don't shoot!